tonight?
Just that we relied on our defense. I thought we got good shots down the stretch. Wide open three from Lee, 2 pull-ups from me, and to get more.
The Indiana Fever's problems this season cannot simply be boiled down to offensive struggles, because while casual observers of the game may be tempted to point towards shooting percentages, missed opportunities in transition, or even the absence of Caitlin Clark in certain stretches, the truth of the matter is that the most glaring issue has been defense, particularly interior defense, which continues to plague the team and overshadow their offensive promise. And when you take a closer look at it, their 2 most recent losses, with Caitlin Clark active against the Atlanta Dream and against the New York Liberty, it becomes clear that the root of those defeats had little to do with the Fever's ability to score and far more to do with their inability to prevent opponents from scoring inside, as each matchup has revealed a repeated pattern where opposing bigs dominate the paint with relative ease, exposing a weakness that has existed since the season tipped off and which, if left unaddressed, threatens to undermine the entire trajectory of this young but high-potential roster. For instance, when Brittany Griner faced the Fever in their first meeting, she looked like an MVP-caliber Nikola Jokic clone, absolutely feasting in the interior, scoring at will and making it appear as though Indiana had no answer at all. And later, when Jonquil Jones matched up against them, she too looked like an unstoppable force, playing with a Jokic-like rhythm and finesse. And the reason this keeps happening is that the Fever simply have not built a team capable of containing elite size and skill on the inside, which in turn inflates the confidence and output of every big they face, essentially giving opponents a 200% power boost in the paint, something that makes average centers look like Hall of Famers. And this is not a coincidence, but rather a systemic flaw that was supposed to be addressed in the offseason, but never truly was, despite some surface-level moves the front office tried to target defense by signing veterans like Dewana Bonner and Natasha Howard, and by hiring a defensive-minded coach in Stephanie White. Yet none of these moves have solved the core issue, because the players they brought in are undersized or mismatched for their roles, while Aaliyah Boston, who should be the anchor in the paint, has struggled with foul trouble and inconsistency, at times playing physically but more often appearing to prioritize offensive production over gritty discipline. Defense, which leaves Indiana vulnerable in ways that better constructed teams capitalize on relentlessly. And while some might argue that Boston is still young and developing, the reality is that her defensive focus simply has not been consistent enough to stabilize this interior weakness, making the Fever's defensive rotations look wishy-washy at best, non-existent at worst. The larger point here is that the Fever's problem is not offensive stagnation, or even a reliance on Caitlin Clark, because the offense, whether explosive or shaky, has shown enough flashes to compete, but rather the defensive foundation is missing, which is why even with Clark, arguably the best defensive rookie and one of the most impactful players in the league, Indiana was only 2-2 at the start, and those 2 losses directly tie back to defensive breakdowns. And it is worth noting that Clark's offensive brilliance can cover a multitude of sins on the scoreboard, but it cannot erase the fact that when your defense is subpar, games remain unnecessarily close or slip out of hand entirely, a truth that mirrors the situation of the Indiana Pacers in the NBA, a team that last year boasted the greatest defensive rating in league history but still could not break through as true contenders because of defensive lapses. Fans and analysts alike have made the Fever Pacers comparison repeatedly, and the parallels are undeniable, because just like the Pacers relied on outscoring opponents in a run-gun style, the Fever have leaned on pace and offensive talent. But as I said in breakdowns of the Pacers, no matter how spectacular your offense, if you cannot stop the other team from scoring at will, you'll hit a ceiling, because defense matters in championships and in playoff-caliber basketball, and that's where the Fever stand now, as a top-3 offensive team when Clark is on the floor, but a bottom-tier defensive team that leaves the paint wide open, undermining their ability to translate scoring into wins. Moreover, transition offense, which is one of Caitlin Clark's greatest gifts as she thrives on pushing pace and creating early offense, cannot even be fully unlocked without stops, because you cannot consistently run and transition off opponent inbounds plays. You can only do it effectively when you force misses or turnovers. And this is why defensive improvement is the key to unlocking the full offensive engine of the Fever, because the guards and wings are ready to fly in transition, But the lack of stops turns every game into a half-court grind where the Fever's defensive lapses repeatedly punish them. And even if the Fever's offense without Clark looks shady at times, the truth is they could still win games if they tightened up defensively, because they have players like Aaliyah Boston who can be fed in the post, veterans like Joanna Bonner who can give steady scoring, and a guard like Kelsey Mitchell who, despite starting slowly this season, has a proven track record of heating up as the year goes on, just as she did last season when she began with low numbers before eventually finding her rhythm, which suggests she will again elevate her production soon. And once she gets going, the Fever's offensive balance will be just fine. But defense, that is the battle they are losing consistently, and no amount of offense can save them from it if it remains unaddressed. Because as long as every opposing big leaves the court looking like Jokic, Karl Anthony Towns, or the best center in the world, this team is going to continue to lose winnable games and frustrate its fan base, which is why conversations about offensive fixes are misguided. It's all about shoring up the defense, particularly the interior rotations, boxing out, and playing with physicality without fouling. And until the Fever prove capable of doing that, they will remain stuck in the same pattern of running hard offensively, only to watch their work get undone on the other end. This brings us to the recent signing of Aari McDonald, a move that generated excitement among some fans, but which should be approached with tempered expectations, because while McDonald does bring speed, effort, and a willingness to push pace, she is not the savior of Indiana's defensive woes, nor is she the kind of player who will single-handedly change the trajectory of the season. And though it is admirable to hope for her success and recognize that this opportunity in Indiana, with the Fever under a national spotlight, represents one of the best shots any player could hope for in terms of visibility and chance to prove themselves, the reality is that McDonald did not make the cut with her previous team for a reason. And while she did show flashes in the preseason with the Sparks against the Valkyries, scoring 12 points on 4 for 11 shooting with a few assists, that performance also highlighted her limitations, because while she is quick and decisive, she is not a polished defensive star, and she certainly cannot mask the interior defensive weaknesses of the Fever, but what she does bring is energy, effort, and a pace that aligns with what the Fever want to do. And in the clips from that game, you can see how she runs the floor, finishes an easy layup in transition, and plays with a motor that can fit nicely alongside teammates who are also conditioned to run. A habit formed in large part because of Caitlin Clark's presence even when she is not on the court. In fact, even without Clark leading the charge, the Fever still seem to run out of habit. And having a guard like McDonald who is eager to sprint and make decisions quickly could help sustain that identity in stretches without Clark, which is a small but meaningful contribution. And another thing to appreciate is her decisiveness. When she caught the ball on the wing and rose into her shot without hesitation, even though she missed, it showed confidence and readiness, qualities that could keep Indiana's second unit from stagnating. And though her shooting percentages may not wow anyone, her form and rhythm are quick, which matches the Fever's preferred style of keeping tempo high. And so, while she is not the best guard on the market, she fits what the Fever want to do in terms of pace, and that is a valuable addition. Yet it is crucial to emphasize again that this move does not solve the core issue of defense, because McDonald is not an interior presence. And what the Fever need more than anything else is someone who can stop them. Leading in the paint, someone who can help Aaliyah Boston stay out of foul trouble and still protect the rim, someone who can match up physically with dominant bigs, and until that piece is found or developed, Indiana is going to keep having the same problem over and over. Fans need to understand that while every signing, every lineup tweak, and every developmental step matters in the long season, there is no magic bullet here, no quick fix that can erase structural defensive weaknesses, and so, the Fever must commit to collective improvement on that end, rotating quicker, boxing out harder, staying
Really exciting, and for us to get one on the road against a really good team, and then to dig down and get stops at the end of the game. I know JJ got the game-winning stop, but to collect.
Kelsey Mitchell, with her speed, explosiveness, and ability to get downhill in a hurry, has long been one of the Indiana Fever's primary offensive weapons, and her style, along with the habits of other players who have been running alongside Caitlin Clark since the beginning of the season, has conditioned this team to naturally push the pace, which is why someone like Aari McDonald, Even though she's a hardship signing and not a long-term roster lock, can still be a useful piece as long as she sticks to what she does best, running the floor, playing with energy, making quick passes, and applying defensive pressure that creates transition opportunities. And when you look at her first game action in the preseason against the Valkyries, you see flashes of what she could provide in a Fever uniform. For example, on one sequence off a pick and roll, she jumps the passing lane, comes up with the steal, pushes the ball in transition, takes one dribble into a rhythm, and pulls up for a three-pointer. And though she misses, the mechanics and decisiveness are impressive because she doesn't hesitate. She immediately flows into her shot with confidence, and you can tell she has the kind of form that could translate into makes once she settles into a groove. And misses like that early in the season are not necessarily bad signs because they are good misses, shots that are online and close, the kind that a shooter can eventually start knocking down once they get comfortable. And the fact that she has a history of being a capable scorer at both the collegiate and professional levels suggests that she could find that rhythm in Indiana. Now, while she did shoot just 4 for 11 from the field in that preseason outing, about 36%, that is not catastrophic by WNBA standards, and what stood out more than her percentage was the energy, the effort, the willingness to defend, and the quickness she brought into the game, because if you look deeper at her possessions, she wasn't just jacking shots. She was also creating deflections, pressuring ball handlers, and nearly coming up with additional steals, which speaks to her defensive instincts. And when Fever head coach Stephanie White was asked about the hardship signing, she made it clear that the Fever weren't just looking for a temporary offensive piece, but rather someone who could contribute on both ends of the floor. Aari McDonald fits that description because she plays with defensive intensity and hustle, qualities that this Fever team has been missing all season. You see her dive into passing lanes, you see her hands active, and even when she doesn't secure the steal, she disrupts the possession, which is precisely what Indiana needs to spark their transition game, because transition opportunities only come from stops. And while Caitlin Clark is the engine of that system when she's on the court, other players like McDonald can help sustain it by forcing turnovers, pushing the ball, and keeping tempo high, which is how the Fever want to play. The challenge, of course, is that McDonald isn't going to have a long leash. She's not going to get 25 to 30 minutes to work through cold shooting nights because she's on a hardship deal and her opportunities will be limited. So she has to hit the ground running and make her presence felt quickly. Otherwise, she may fade out of the rotation. But if she can hit a couple shots, provide that defensive spark, and simply play decisively, she will have justified her spot and potentially earn more looks around the league. Fans who dismiss her based on efficiency numbers may forget that efficiency in the WNBA is tricky. Very few guards